All right, hello. Welcome to this episode of the Marketing Guides for Small Business podcast, our 101st episode. I'm Paul, today joined by our panel of marketing experts, Ken, Ian, and Jen. And today we're going to talk about mobile optimization and how it affects your rankings or how it can affect your rankings. And so, Jen, I'm going to start with you. I'm sure a lot of people have heard the term responsive web design, and Google has even stated that they support that. So, what is it and why is it important?
Responsive web design. Okay, so if you're not in the web design area and you don't know anything about it, you have experienced responsive web design. And what that means is the very same website that you open up on your laptop or on your tablet or on your phone, you'll notice that you still can go to that website, but it might look slightly different. And it's responding, I'm using air quotes if we're on audio, responding to the size of the screen. And, it's funny because uh, well, I guess we're all around the same age. I was going to say back in my day, back when the web first started, and then the first available mobile phone came out that you could access the web on. It was a very different experience, right? You had this tiny little web page that you were looking at and pinching and scrolling and spreading out on your screen to be able to see it. But these days, it just works for the size of the screen. So in technical terms, that's called responsive design because, quite literally, the website is responding to the size of the screen. And what it's doing is changing how the elements show up on the screen to give you all that kind of information. So if you go into a website on your laptop where it's, I guess it's more horizontal, when it comes onto your mobile phone, it might be stacked more vertically. You still get the information, but it's there per screen size. What's so important about this is, at the very heart of it, our businesses have websites so that we can convey, the products and services that we sell. And, if we're in e-commerce, we're making a sale off of it. If we're in a larger ticket item, we're building trust and, providing information on the website. And it's important that no matter what device somebody comes to look at your website on, that they can get that information and, have a good experience based on your website. So that's responsive design. And it's virtually in every website. It would be very shocking today to come across a website that doesn't load, very well on your mobile phone, and you'd know it right off the bat for sure.
Yeah, where you have to pinch and zoom. You still
Yeah,
find them.
you still
You
find them.
do.
You do.
And actually, the precursor to responsive web design was adaptive design, and a lot of it, you'll know that because it'll say like m.somedomain.com.
Yeah,
And
or a
it's
.mobi.
right, and it's actually a different website, which is why people move to responsive design, because it's the same website. It's not a separate website, and it's using something called the viewport size, which I won't get into, to decide when to show those different structures and layouts.
Yeah, but even then, with like a .mobi, a lot of the technologies, those were completely separate websites.
Right.
So you had to maintain two different ones.
Yeah.
And you know, thank goodness we don't have to do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ian, why, we've probably all run into businesses that say, well, my website's fine on desktop. I don't need mobile optimization, but they do. So can you talk about that a little bit? Why is it so important? Or why has it become so important?
Yeah. Let me start by sharing some stats. People spend around 5 hours a day on their smartphones. 70% of web traffic comes from mobile phones. 80% of top ranked websites are mobile friendly. 61% of users will never return to a website that is not mobile friendly. And the stats go on and on and on. So really the first reason that you have to, as a business, have a mobile optimized website is that those statistics show that, and these statistics grow every year. Like being in the business, we've seen it dramatically increase. In fact, on the Google Analytics side, regardless of what industry you're in, like we work with B2B companies, we work with B2C companies, and B2B is always trailing because if you think about it, most business to business, depending on the industry, of course, a lot of B2B people are behind computers when they're at the office. But even there, like we've seen a dramatic increase where even B2Bs, it's 24% mobile traffic for some of them. Some of them it's 50 to 60% now. And 2 years ago it was much lower. So the key thing there is that you have to present a website that will look fantastic and convey the information and be fast to the people that are looking for it. It's all about the people. It's all about the searchers. The other side of that equation, so that's the people side. And Jen's great at explaining this when she talks about, how a website has to be built for people and for robots. And so I love your terminology with that, Jen. And so the robot side of it, and we'll use Google as the main example because 90% of searches are Google. Google has moved to a mobile first algorithm for most business websites. So if your business has been hit with this change, which started 2 to 3 years ago for a lot of businesses, you are at your website is basically being penalized if it is not mobile optimized. And the reason Google did that is, again, that's what people want. They want that exceptional experience regardless of what device they're on. So that's really important. Google is the main conduit that your website is going to get visitors to, whether it's Google Ads, organic. Organic is the biggest conveyor of people to your website. So you really need that. Just to explain, Jen did a great job of this, but just to explain like a little bit more about why it's so important. Google also invited or invented Core Web Vitals, which is really about user experience. And so, and a lot of that is related to mobile user experience. And so it's about speed. It's about the experience of what happens as your page is loading. And so those things are really, really important from a mobile standpoint, and those directly affect your SEO. So it's not just about the experience of being on the website that's so important. It's also about getting people to your website. So as a business, you're hindering your success if you don't do a mobile optimized website. Did I convey that well enough, guys?
You did.
Yeah.
Yes. And so Ian kind of went into this a little bit, but what is mobile first indexing? And I'll explain what Ian was talking about with the Core Web Vitals thing. I'll go into that a little more. But they've moved to mobile first indexing. So what does that mean for a business and their website?
Well, that means that from a search ranking perspective, Google is going to look at the performance of your website on mobile before it's going to look at desktop. So because mobile, usually the devices and maybe even the bandwidth are frequently a lot less than you might have on a desktop, especially if you have a wired internet connection in your office, for example, or your home. You don't have that that pipe necessarily as fast on a phone. So the Core Web Vitals really it's all about user experience. Google now, it consistently, as Ian was talking about, almost every industry now, the majority of people who are hitting business websites across the majority of industries is coming from mobile. If you're younger audience, if you've got a younger audience of people who are coming to your website, they may not even own desktops anymore. Their primary way that they surf the internet is from their phone. So Google recognized that, and it embraced this and launched this concept called Core Web Vitals. And it really comes down to three things. One is, how fast does your page load? what is the ease of the interaction? And by there, if you have a lot of script code on your website that slows down the loading and the experience of the user on that site, then that's gonna degrade your score when you measure it against the core web vitals. And then we've all seen this before. When you load a website, sometimes you see that stacking and alternating of loading of as pictures load and stuff like that. So that visual stability aspect, Google says that's not a great user experience. And I think anybody who's seen that agrees. It's like you're about ready to click on something and all of a sudden it jumps on you and you click on something you didn't want. How many times does that happen? I mean, it just pisses you off. So
Usually an ad, right?
yeah, it almost always is an ad. So, and for me, I mean, I am constantly amazed how many times I go to websites and they're just inundated with crap on their sites that loads slowly, that does all this stacking. That's a horrible experience. I mean, honestly, if I really need to be there, I'll stay. But if I have another alternative and I found another interesting search result before I decided to click on the one that I did that's performing like crap, I'm going to close out that tab or that window as fast as possible and I'm going to go to the next result. And Google knows look, it understands people's behaviors. I'm not alone in this. I'm sure you all do it too. So one thing I do want to say too is now that we are in a world, and look, there are certain industries where, and certain businesses, even within industries, that are outside the norm. You may have an insurance agency where the bulk of your clients are maybe 40 and above. You may have practically no mobile visits to your website. It's still possible. It still happens. So you always have to think about who are my customers, who are my likely ideal customers and prospects. What devices are they using? And you need to think about that. So if you're thinking about, if you think and your analytics and everything else that you have access to look at the performance of your website is telling you that most people are coming via mobile device, your website should be designed first with mobile presentation in mind. So it's not only a performance issue, it's a user experience issue. If you don't have a simple, easy to follow and understand website, you're going to confuse and you're going to lose people right away. And especially if they're hitting on a mobile device, because the problem is compounded when you're looking at websites on a phone. So it's really important to think about how you design your website now, thinking mobile in mind. And so a lot of customers we talk to, they're like, I don't want a big, long scrolling homepage. It's like, I just want to say this. Basically, they want it to look like a PowerPoint slide, and that's their website. That's not the user experience today. And even from a user interaction perspective, if you're on social media, what do? You swipe down or you swipe up. You're very accustomed to that and doing that. So having a long scrolling homepage, as long as it's designed with the web core vitals in place, meaning that you've got lazy loading of images or videos, meaning that they don't need to be loaded when the website's first pulled up. They only need to be loaded as the user is navigating down toward that content. That's an aspect of what Google is trying to do with Core Web Vitals. And so it's really become a major design decision. And so even though we have a great technology with responsive design capabilities, it still doesn't mean that you should design a website the way you used to design them when you were designing specifically for desktop. Maybe it's fine, maybe it's not. You got to think about who your ideal customers and prospects are and what devices they're going to be using.
Hey, Ken, can I just want to add something, because something you said there really tweaked a point I think that's important for our listeners and viewers to know, is that if you use your own Google Analytics, as your only data to determine whether people are on mobile or desktop, it actually, and your current website is not mobile optimized, it will give you false data, because Google will be trying to send you mobile users, but when it comes back that they're bouncing because their mobile experience is horrible, Google will stop sending mobile users to your website, and your data will reflect that. So it's almost like a false positive, right?
Yeah.
It can be misleading. So industry stats are really important to guide people in, and the industry stats are super clear, right? You need a mobile optimized website
Yeah.
in order to move forward into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great point.
And if you do have a business where you have older demographics, they're probably going to die at some point, and you're going to need younger people, which means you're going to need a mobile optimized site.
Oh, that was so well said.
And I don't know if you guys have seen this, but we've actually seen a huge rise in, especially the last 4 or 5 years. Like seniors are not, yes, they were trailing initially with smartphones and tablets. They are not like they're the fastest. I mean, they're obviously the fastest growing demographic because they didn't have them before. But it's a huge number now. Like they're big into Facebook. They're big into a lot of the social media because it's how they connect with their family and friends now.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't discount seniors at all as non-tech users.
Right.
And so we've talked about the Web Vitals, Core Web Vitals. So there's 3 main components of that. And Ken, what you were talking about with things jumping around, that's called cumulative layout shift, and that's where things move around on the screen before it's fully loaded. Yeah. And then another one is largest contentful paint. Don't know where Google came up with that, but it's the largest, whatever the largest piece of content is. And it might be a hero image, it might be a GIF.
Explain a hero image real quick.
That's that big image across the top of the website. Ian was saying.
So before you go on to that, people need to realize, it's really easy to upload a picture and put it on a website.
Yes, too easy.
And if you grab it from your camera and you just upload it, it's going to be massive more than likely. So you don't want to do that.
Yeah, and that's before we started the podcast. Ian was talking about a website he was working on that, what did you say, it was like 3 megabytes or something like that?
Yeah, the previous developers had actually uploaded this lovely GIF or GIF, depending on your pronunciation of it, that was a video walkthrough of a tool, a quoting tool on the website, and it was over 3 meg. And so it was being flagged by Google as slowing down the whole loading process because it was at the top of the page too.
Yeah, and whatever that largest piece of content is, that's what Google's going to look at for that largest contentful paint of the website. And then there's something called total blocking time, which is how many scripts, because every time, and you probably you may have heard defer loading of JavaScript, defer loading of scripts, because every time the website has to call a script, and the worst ones, and unfortunately it's a necessary evil, is these where it calls these social media. You have the Facebook icon on your website and the LinkedIn, and those are all external scripts. So you want to put those in the footer, not necessarily up in the header, because every time the website has to make a request for that, the loading stops. Now, it may only be a millisecond, but it adds up. If you have 10, 12, 13 of those, it adds up. And you want to keep your total load time under 2 seconds. And some would even say that's a little bit too long. So that's what those.
Yeah. So Paul, just to be clear, if you put social media icons on your website where you're just linking to your social media profiles, that's not a script.
Correct.
So that doesn't create the load, or the loading issue that you talked about with the scripts. So just I want to make sure that that's clear. But if you took a plugin that pulled in your Instagram feed and put it onto your website, that's a script. because
Yes.
it's pulling content from Instagram and plopping it on your website. That's the kind of thing that can really slow down the performance.
And
And do
that's,
you guys find the worst culprits I always come across are actually Google's own properties? So YouTube and Google Maps
yes, I
are
know.
they're horrible.
Yep. Well, it's okay for Google to do it because it's Google.
Yeah, well, but they don't ignore it in the core web vitals, right? It still
No,
flags
they
it as
don't.
slow.
So,
So
Paul, how do you overcome that?
you put them in the footer for one thing, and then you can delay the loading of scripts. And I won't get into the technical ways to do that, but there actually are caching plugins which actually have a really light footprint, and they they will do that for you, or you can get like a real hosting platform that does that, a lot of that at the server level. They may not minify JavaScript or CSS files, but they can do a lot of this caching and deferring at a server level, and then you don't have to worry about it.
So that's another reason why you don't want to just buy the cheapest hosting plan.
So, Jen, there are, well, I didn't want to get into the technical aspects of that and start boring everybody, but
And I just want to say, I think it's important to intervene here and just like tell our listeners and viewers that Paul is showing great restraint because one of his superpowers is understanding. Like he gets so deep in this area and he's so good at it that, you know, even in your language, Paul, like I have to commend you. You're staying very restrained and trying to make sure that this is very understandable for the common person. So that's a public service announcement to all our listeners and viewers.
well, you know,
Paul's doing a great job.
It's one of those areas that can get very technical.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think it's important for people to understand it's important, even though they don't necessarily need to understand the details or the how, but they need to understand why that this is important.
Yeah.
And, you know, to help them know the right questions to ask if they're looking at a marketing agency or a web developer. There's certain questions that you have to ask. But Jen, so let's talk about content a little bit. There are different types of content that help SEO. And is that content different for local SEO than for what we refer to as traditional SEO?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And it's important. Let me tell a story about a local SEO situation that we had that may, I don't know, may lead into my answers a little bit better. But so we had a dry cleaner as a client, and there was some pushback of like, why would a dry cleaner need to produce content on their website? What was the big deal? Doesn't everybody like locally know where the dry cleaner is? Like why would they want to produce content about what was going on in the neighborhood or how to get, you know, coffee stains out of your, you know, your favorite blouse or whatever it was? And it's much bigger than that, because when we dug into some trying to find some information about neighborhoods and what happens in neighborhoods and how people flow through neighborhoods. And what we found out, and in this particular neighborhood, this is in Boston, that there was something like this fuzzy stats here, but about 700 people moved out of that neighborhood every year, and roughly the same amount moved in. So it was not necessarily growing, but there was movement throughout the neighborhood of people leaving that used to know about the dry cleaner, new people moving in. Obviously, where's the grocery store? Where's the dry cleaner? Where's the best pizza place? That kind of thing. And what we found out is that local search, so people pulling up where's the nearest gas station, pizza shop, you know, dry cleaner in my neighborhood, there was a significant amount of search that people would do on their mobile phones about like, where do I find certain local services? And so if you're thinking about having a local business in your own neighborhood or your own region or your own catchment area, there are people coming in every day that are just brand new to that area that need to know where, a store or a service like yours exists. And so that would be just the case for why it's important for a local business to take this the producing content and producing local content very, very seriously, because people are searching for local products and services that you sell. So examples of local SEO, I've got a list here. So examples of some content that you could have up on your website that count or that help you get found locally would be any kind of content that is city, neighborhood, region specific. So in this one, dry cleaners in Back Bay, Boston, HVAC and serving, the southwest of Calgary or whatever region it is. So that kind of content, those kind of words, really specifically talking about what the service or product is that you have to offer and the region or area where you service. FAQs always work. Any kind of specials. So if you're a local business, you have a special on, people probably aren't flying across the country or, driving across the city to get that special. It'll be, local within your catchment area. Any kind of local events that you have that you are putting on, or any kind of local events that you're partnering with. So this is really helpful if you can become a sponsor of a local event that's happening in your city or region. That can help you. And the last one that I noticed that I hadn't really thought about this before, but it makes a lot of sense, is a best of guide within the region or the local area of you. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to list it on the guide. You can develop your own guide, but of course it's all going to be locally focused, local business, and that will help. So local SEO differs from, I guess, traditional SEO, is that it is specific to local area, local neighborhood, local catchment area where you serve, as opposed to larger than that.
Yeah. And, something to keep in mind when people do use those geo modifiers, as we call them, in a search phrase, or even if it's near me, because if it's on your phone, Google could use a GPS. But if they type in plumber Boston or plumber in Boston, that's going to trigger a different search algorithm on Google's end, because the local search algorithm is different. And that's another reason that's important. So all that being said, Ian, how would we go about optimizing for mobile? How is it different than traditional website optimization?
Sure. Yeah. And I'll kind of come at it from two different angles. One, I want to share about kind of drawing off of what Jen has talked about from an SEO standpoint, because I think that's a really great starting point to talk about it, and then share some other aspects of it as well. But from an SEO standpoint, you talked about how it's a different algorithm, right? We talked about that at the beginning. You just reinforced that now, Paul. It's important that you actually do keyword research for mobile devices. So when we're doing keyword research, we can reference the desktop algorithm when we're doing the research. We can reference the mobile device or mobile algorithm. We can also focus on a geographic area. So for businesses, that's really important. Whoever you're working with to develop your website or your SEO plans, they should be providing that kind of information in the keyword research in order to produce and find the gold within the keyword research. Because that will actually then decide what you put on your website as far as content, words, pictures, guides, all of that kind of stuff, because you'll know what people are searching for. That's the beauty of SEO research, is that our keyword research is it's handing you, here is the lowest hanging fruit for you and the highest volume searches, so that you as a business can try to displace the people that are currently ranking on there and get found, because that's ultimately why you're building a website anyways. So that's really important to know. On the technical side of optimizing a website, I think the biggest difference that a business needs to know, but also web developers, because quite frankly, it's not always true, depending who you hire, that mobile should not be an afterthought. It depending on how you develop websites, it might be in tandem with desktop, or it might actually displace desktop to some degree as your first, here's how we're going to develop the website and here's why. And if the data is telling you that mobile searches far outweigh desktop, then you need to absolutely make sure that that is your primary development goal, and desktop needs to be important on there as well. So I think it's a mindset shift. You need to actually shift your mind, because most people, when they're reviewing websites, are on their desktop. We even presentations that we do for the client when we walk them through the website, it's on the desktop. So just a mindset shift. It's important also to I wrote down some points here, and one of them that kept coming up when I was thinking through this process was quality control. So a lot of quality control is done for the desktop, because again, that's where most businesses are reviewing websites. But I have seen, in fact, when we build websites for clients, we tell them, like, go to your phone, load up the website before it's launched, the staging site, and walk through it. Like, that is the best. That's a real life interaction with the website, so you'll understand how it works, how your clients and prospects will see it. But it seems to be an afterthought. And part of that, creating and optimizing your website to work well, we've covered this, I think, in enough of this discussion, but you need to absolutely make sure your images are at the right resolution for mobile. You need to make sure that your videos can be viewed properly. One of the big things I see is spacing. If something is primarily designed for desktop, even if it's responsive, sometimes developers put a lot of spacing around the edges, and then they don't realize that they have to make sure on the mobile it doesn't transfer that spacing over. Because I see this all the time when we're reviewing websites. Maybe you guys do. I see Jen nodding, but you end up with like text that's like half a sentence wide, and you're like scrolling just to read one paragraph. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's horrible. And that's even on mobile optimized websites that have not been properly quality controlled.
Yeah.
And the last thing about that is, I think forms and calls to actions, because that's actually your primary purpose, is to drive action. Test those on the mobile, see how it works. And then, just make sure you have this mindset shift that your website has to work really well on mobile.
So,
did I forget anything?
No, I thought that was
Okay.
Well, I mean, I would just say, a traditional SEO, whether it's local or when I say traditional, I don't mean local versus the traditional or national or international SEO. I mean the traditional things you used to do for SEO. There's now a whole brand new task list associated with reviewing and optimizing the performance of your website for mobile, that now has become a major factor for SEO. So it's like there's just it's like probably what a 50 to 100% increase in the scope of SEO work that's needed on a monthly basis.
Yeah, and you're talking about like Core Web Vitals, like testing it on those page
going
speed.
in, finding the pictures that were uploaded because there was a lazy
Absolutely.
developer who, I'm guilty of that. We're all probably guilty of it at times, where we just put on a picture that, and we didn't take time to resize it. There are some image compression plugins that can help with that and all that kind of stuff too. But still, you want to go back through your website on a very regular basis and fix the stuff, because even what's not a problem today might be a problem tomorrow, because your competitors are going to change. And if they're starting to create lightning fast websites, and your website used to be pretty good and pretty solid, and maybe it still is, but it's no longer anywhere near in comparison to the performance of other sites of your competitors, you may see a degradation in your search rankings because of stuff like that. So it's not anything that you can ignore. It's certainly not, once you achieve it, you're done. You constantly have to go back and revisit it. And I think it's important for people to realize, you know, the scope of what we used to do from an SEO perspective at looking at links and keyword, mapping to content, and are we ranking for the right phrases? Are we building blog posts that are targeting? Are we using language that communicates with the customers? Is the user experience? All of that is still there, but now you have all of these extra things to go in and fix the problems that are showing up with tools that show you what your problems are related to the core web vitals.
That's a great point, Ken. The one thing I find too, especially, is if it's a website managed by the agency that manages the SEO, usually you keep it pretty clean, right? Because it's to your own benefit to get great SEO results. The ones I find really get bloated fast, and you do need to integrate some sort of self-auditing process or have your agency audit your website on a quarterly basis at the minimum, is those websites that are self-managed, where a company is uploading their own blog posts, uploading their own image galleries, because those things can be massive really, really fast. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Something else you said there, Ken, reminded me from an SEO standpoint, we haven't even touched on this, but it's really important for mobile, is voice search. So you were talking about how SEOs become more complex, and part of that too is voice search, because we all use Siri, Google, Alexa to get answers to questions. You're driving, you want a coffee shop near you, you say, Google, where's the closest coffee shop, right? Pulls it up on your map listings. You're like, I want that one. There's actually SEO strategies to help you get found on those that need to be done so that you show up, your business shows up to answer those questions. And that's almost a whole other topic, but an important one these days, because voice search is growing rapidly.
Absolutely, big time.
And Ken, you had mentioned image compression, plugins, algorithms, whatever. If you're starting with a 15 megabyte picture, it can only compress that so much.
That's true.
So back to your point of using the correct image size and the correct resolution, because that's where you get the most benefit from image compression, is if you start with the proper image size and resolution in the first place.
Yeah.
So, Ken, I'm going to preface this by saying you have to understand what the data from different tools is telling you, but there are some free tools and resources out there that a local business owner could use. Could you talk about what some of those are?
Yeah, I mean, probably the one that I would start with is GT metrics. That's going to give you a real good indication of the performance of how fast your pages are loading. Google also has a page load speed tool as well. You can use either one of those two, but I like GT metrics because it tells you, aligned with the web core vitals, the issues that you're facing. And it gives your website an overall grade, based on the performance and the load speed. So it's really kind of my go-to tool for that. You can learn a lot, just by looking at your Google Search Console. I assume Bing, has tools that would allow you to see what's going on there as well. Ian mentioned Google Analytics, which is certainly a valuable tool to help you understand the traffic that you're getting to your website. But again, like Ian said, it may also be skewed, because if your website's not performing well, then the number of mobile visitors that you normally should be getting, maybe you're not getting because of those issues. There are probably a whole host of tools that you can find on marketing company websites that will give you a free analysis. A lot of those tools are solid, but not always accurate. So I mean, you might stumble across some of those. If you're wanting to look at paid tools, I think you look at tools like Moz and SEMrush and Ahrefs and things like that, because they're, but you have to have probably more technical understanding, to work with, the results of what those tools are telling you. So there are a lot of different tools. The reality is, and there are website tools that are out there that I don't personally recommend, but they're kind of all in one. Build your own website, have it hosted, all that kind of stuff. They have things that try to address common mistakes that a novice user is going to make, like uploading the 15 megabyte picture, and things like that. But if you're really serious about it, um, you probably need to have some technical review from time to time. Maybe not all the time, maybe not an ongoing thing. It's always going to depend on how big your business is, what your budget is. But some of this stuff, especially when it comes to, if I mean, there are web chat widgets, there are there are facilities that pull in content from other sources onto your website. You've got tracking codes, on and on and on. I mean, before you know it, then you upload a bunch of pictures to your website without any thought about, what using 300 DPI images. I mean, first of all, that makes no sense on the web because the web can't interpret that. But so you're just needlessly adding bulk to your website that what novice person is going to know that, right? So regardless, I mean, that's why you need these tools to tell you what the problems are. But I still suspect that many times you're going to have to hire an expert to fix these things.
And one thing I would say, it has a little less to do with mobile optimization, but your Google business profile, there's this thing in there called insights that can give you some really good information, not necessarily from an optimization score, but it can help you see how you're performing on Google Maps. And if you suck, then you should probably find out what's going on.
So, Paul, having said that, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that popped into my mind while we were talking earlier, I can't remember what made me think of it, but if I mean, for many businesses, showing up on the Google Maps, in the 3-pack is the holy grail, right? I mean, that's like a prime property. What impact does the mobile optimization of your website have in terms of helping you show up on the Google Map results, if any?
Pretty much everything, because you're showing up in that 3-pack. That's all the local search algorithm. It's pulled from maps, and Google will penalize you if your performance is poor on mobile. And if it's bad enough, it can actually, like Ian said earlier, they will actually you'll stop showing up for searches on mobile devices, which is where a lot of that comes from. If someone's doing a search on a mobile device, Google's going to use that GPS to see where they are and show the closest results. But I'm not saying that you can't show up in that 3-pack without mobile optimization, but if your competitors are mobile optimized and you're not, you're probably not going to show up. Does that make sense? So all this being said, should we care about desktop optimization? Does it matter?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Because, personally, I don't have any stats on this right this second, but insurance documents, long white papers, serious articles I need to read and think about. That's the kind of thing that I want to be looking at on the desktop or on the laptop. or if I'm doing some research work in order to write. I mean, right now I have 2 screens set up, and it just helps me organize my work. So for certain content, for certain pieces of work, I think it's really important that the desktop still performs well.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Jen. From my perspective, I was sharing kind of the stats of my existing clients from Google Analytics, how the breakdown is on their mobile optimized website and why it's so important. But the reverse, I was using it as a support for mobile optimization, but it's equally true on the inverse, that for some of those clients, you know, say 10% of their visitors come from desktop, say 20%, say 30, say 40, say 50, say 60. What business in their right mind would just say, I don't care about those. I don't care about 10% of the people coming to my website. I don't need them. Like, no business in their right mind would stop 10% of people coming through their door to buy a product or a service. So that's essentially what you're doing if you were to ignore desktop users, or on the inverse, ignore mobile user. I think it's part of a holistic approach to marketing, that you need to attract the qualified people that are searching for your product or service on whatever device they're on. It doesn't really matter, except to know that you need to be there and show up properly.
Yeah, desktops aren't going away. And, you know, I was reading an article a while back on consumer behavior that a lot of people, they will do their initial searches on mobile, but then they'll go to their desktop and actually purchase the product. So just from that standpoint alone, it matters.
I do that for sure. Yeah.
And I can say I'm actually reverse in some ways, in that when I'm doing heavy research, whether it's for hotels, products, whatever it is, I actually love doing it on my desktop, because I can have tabs open where I'm like, okay, what were the specs of that one, or what were the reviews of that hotel, right? Like I actually find it easier because, yeah, just space.
Yeah.
Whether, you know, even Amazon, I do that where I'm comparing products I'm looking at, and then, yeah, sometimes I'm on my phone, but a lot of times I'm on my desktop.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm abnormal that way, but that's how I research.
That's very interesting, because and also too, for purchasing, if it's a small repeat purchase, I feel comfortable on mobile. But if it's a larger purchase or involves a little, like, some more thinking, I just feel like I have to be sitting down at my desk.
It's your serious spot, right? Like, you mean business.
That kind of purchase. Yeah, I don't know why. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just a better feeling of, I'm just looking at my 2 screens right now. I'm just like, I have the information. I'm going to make a wise decision. Here's my credit card, and away you go.
Yeah.
Just another point to this whole question about desktop, like ignoring desktop. You know, we talked a little bit about the difference between business to consumer and business to business, and how for a lot of B2Bs, mobile is very, very important, but it's still trending up at a greater degree, right? So it's the number of mobile users for a lot of B2B businesses is smaller than if you were to look at business to consumer. So desktop, you know, because most businesses, if it's an office job, you're in front of a desktop. So, but then if you're a landscaper and you need to rent equipment, you're on mobile, right? So it totally depends on your industry. But yeah, just thought I'd share that.
Good insight.
All right, well, that seems like a pretty good place to wrap up, unless someone has something to add. So thanks everyone for listening, and we will talk to you next week.